Listen, Talk, Repeat podcast. I'm Wendy Capewell, your relationship specialist, and this podcast is all about things relating and affecting relationships. I'll be interviewing guests who are experts in their profession, learning more about what they do and how they help others. In some episodes, I'll be sharing some insights and tips of my own. So settle back and enjoy. So today I'm going to be talking to Katy Jon Went, a non-binary transgender person who's passionate at LGBT issues and mental health awareness. And I'm going to get her to introduce herself and tell us more, because I just had a chat with her. It's the first time I met Katy, and I just love it. So I hope the listeners do too. So please introduce yourself, Katy Jon.
Thank you, Wendy. Yes, I mean, I've been someone who's grown up and found that LGBT issues and mental health issues have both affected me massively. So there's something I've learned to be honest about, instead of spending 40 years in the closet about pretty much both of them. And because they affect me, I found that being honest and being genuine and being transparent and being authentic has been the thing that has driven me into better circumstances, better opportunities, and particularly the best kind of relationships. Because you don't want to be in a relationship where there's no honesty and no transparency and genuineness. And so I found that is what has changed my life for the better. Has been honest about those things. So I suppose that's driven my passion, and it's driven my advocacy of those things for others, because I see so many other people still suffering both society's projections and discriminations around those things, but also their own internalized ones, which I had absolutely myself.
Yeah, and I think whatever the gender, whatever the relationship, if there's not honesty and transparency, that's where so much goes wrong. And yeah, working with couples, I find that they're scared to be honest and generally we're scared to be honest, to be ourselves, because of that non-acceptance. If we don't conform to what society tells us we should be, or how we were brought up. And we were talking just now about that book, The Four Agreements, and I think that is really blows it open, doesn't it? It just says we should be transparent and honest and be ourselves. And yeah, and I think
much of it's that fear of rejection.
Oh yeah.
And one of the lessons I've learned, that the best relationship you actually have is with yourself, obviously, and being happy to be alone, because if you don't love your own company, why would you expect anyone else to? And so being with yourself and being responsible for your own love and satisfaction then stops putting the onus on someone else, and then takes away that fear of rejection, that you can't be yourself because, oh my gosh, they might leave me, and then, oh my God, I will be devastated, as opposed to thinking, well, actually, I fulfill most of my own needs. My relationship is absolutely the icing on the cake, rather than what I would call the filling sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that's it, because so many people just look to somebody else to bring them happiness, make them happy. And I have those conversations with people. But what do you want for your relationship? Well, I want them to make me happy, or I feel I need to make them happy. Well, no, you can't do that. And as you say, if you're reliant on somebody else totally, then you never learn about yourself, and you never learn to cope on your own, and then the enjoyment, as you say, the icing on the cake, whatever the relationship, that makes it really special, doesn't it? Instead of feeling, well, I need somebody in my life, I've got to have somebody around me. Well, yeah.
I remember when I went into therapy for the first time, not long after being out, and I thought my therapy would all be about, speaking to my therapist, like, how do you stop me being transgender, please? I asked her, my psychiatrist said to me, you're the most reluctant transsexual I've ever met. I said, yeah, was trying to get rid of it for years.
Well,
And my therapist, pretty much derailed my entire 18 months of therapy from being a conversation about my gender to being a conversation about both my relationships with my ex-wife and my relationship with myself ultimately. And she said, "What's your biggest fear?" And she lent me that book, Susan Jeffers' Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway.
yeah.
And I never read it. I just looked at the front page, the cover, Feel the Fear, Do It Anyway. I thought, oh, that makes sense, I'll do that. But the principle behind it was that my biggest fear was that if I came out and pursued being transgender, that I would be lonely for the rest of my life. That who would want to date a trans person? Who would want to date me? In fact, in my marriage, it was my wife that had proposed to me the first time, pretty much telling me, I want to marry you. So I kind of felt it was safe to ask her eventually when I did, because I already knew she was going to say yes, and she'd already hinted that she wanted to marry me. So that fear of rejection and that fear of being alone was two of the things really that held me back from coming out. And when I did, I was quite surprised to find out over the next 10 years that I actually can't remember more than a month or two ever being out of a relationship in the last decade. And 90% of them have still come up to me and asked me out still.
Yeah. So can I ask, when you met your wife, did you have those feelings about, were you unsure about your sexuality at that point? Or
well, I was married for 15 years, from sort of 25 through to 39 3/4. Let's do an Adrian Mole. But I first felt gender questioning issues around the age of 5. First time I went to school and they said, boys sit here, girls sit here. In my head, I thought, well, okay, I think I should go and sit with the boys because, I check between my legs and that's what I think I'm meant to be. And then I thought, but the girls are way more fun. And the girls are the ones I feel like I belong to socially and emotionally. The girls are the ones I felt more comfortable with. And I thought, well, I should be sitting with them, but I don't look like them. I look like them. And, oh, I'm so confused. And I kind of felt, where's my chair then? Because there's girls' chairs and boys' chairs, and then there's no Katy chair. And then I remember I think it was about age 9 when we used to play Kiss Chase in the school playground before the headmaster banned it. And back in those days, the only kind of Kiss Chase they could ever envisage was heterosexual. So the girls would line up at one end of the netball court and the boys at the other end, and then they would chase each other and try and grab one and kiss them. It would probably all be banned now based on, abusive issues. But I remember thinking at the time, okay, I'm fairly certain I want to chase the girls, but I'm also fairly certain I want to be on the girls' team. And I'm sure that doesn't sound fair. That would give me an unfair advantage because I'd already be up their end. So I better go and join the boys' side for now. So I know those feelings were there way before puberty.
Right. So I wonder how difficult that was when you were entering into that relationship. With your partner.
Well, because I was an evangelical Christian at the time, I entered into what I thought was a marriage for life. I also thought that being trans was a sin. I thought that any kind of sexuality outside of heterosexuality was also a sin. I couldn't work out whether my desires were heterosexual or homosexual based on who I was attracted to, or also depending on what gender I was and whether it was anything still after that. So I did go through prayer, some attempted at the time deliverance ministry of trying to stop me being who I was, and kind of agreed to it. And I kind of said to my then wife before we got married, I want to kind of clear out the skeletons in my closet before we get married. So we both went for some kind of Christian counselling to put everything on the table, so to speak. And so it came out on the table, and then it was put back in the closet with a view to the fact that religion and marriage will solve this and it will just go away. And that was the hope, but it didn't.
And I think that's what's happened so often to anybody, that they're told that they've got to conform, they've got to be in that box, whatever it is, and because it suits society. And I don't know how distressing that is for some people in the world.
Well, it was, that was from the age of, as I said, it was at 5 when I first began to have these feelings. And it was, 39 and 3/4 before I was ever able to be open about them. I was outed by my ex-wife, and actually after the fact, I'm really appreciative of her for that, because I don't think I'd have come out until I was 49 and 3/4 if it hadn't have been for her outing me. So in the end, it was a good thing. And if I'd had the courage and probably not the religious worldview that I had, I might have come out earlier, which I'm looking at young kids today, the fact that they're coming out in their teens to their parents, the parents are supportive. I would love to live now knowing who I am now, but roll back 30 years in terms of my youthfulness, because I feel old and don't have some of the same advantages of a whole life ahead of them that they have.
Yeah.
So I would love to have that degree of freedom in the change of environment that we do have now.
Yeah. And I'm wondering now, how has being transgender and the surgery that you've had affected your relationships?
Well, that was a tough one, because again, as I said, I was the most reluctant transsexual in Norfolk, certainly. And my psychiatrist was seeing, 50 to 100 new transgender people coming every year just in Norfolk alone. And he said I was the most reluctant he's ever met. But he also had already known me beforehand and said, I'm so glad you have come out. He said, because when you were male, you were trying too hard. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it was so obvious you were kind of hyper-masculine, trying so hard to be male, but not really feeling it. So I found that interesting.
Gosh,
But in terms of my relationships, I was still I tried in the early days I saw people like Eddie Izzard on TV, and I thought, okay, yeah, I'll just try being cool and transgender. But I don't think I could go the whole hog and be transsexual in terms of the op. And so I thought, okay, I'll meet this being trans thing halfway, and I'll give it some ground, but not go all the way. And so I had relationships for 4 years as Katy, but with a fully male body before any hormones. And then for another 4 years, having started hormones with growing breasts and decreasing sex drive because of the hormones. And then finally for 2 years post-op. So I kind of had relationships at all stages of transition. And I suppose one of the biggest issues I found was partners who had a vested interest in the outcome of my body. And what I mean by that is, for example, you could marry someone and then they could have a car accident and be paralyzed below the waist. And if you've got a vested interest in only being with someone because of how they deliver in that department as being the real bedrock of your relationship rather than the bonus, that can be quite difficult. So I had partners who said, I want you to keep your male genitalia because, that's what I want out of you in our relationship. And equally, I had partners who said, I want you to get rid of them because I want to be in a fully lesbian relationship with you. And most of the girls I dated for the last decade were lesbian or bisexual. But they each had different interests, and they had their own opinion as to what I should do with my body. And Esther was the first person who actually said to me, who I was in a relationship with, she said, I don't mind what you do with your body. She said, I actually think you'd look rather good with the female genitalia, but it's your decision, and I will support you whether you keep it, change it, do whatever you want with it. I fall in love with you as a person, not with the variation or bits of your body and how they might change. And that was the first time I ever felt in a relationship that I could make the decision about my body for me, knowing that I had actually transparent support from a partner who would be there for me, whatever I chose. And that was remarkable and a privilege to have that opportunity, because I kind of knew I couldn't go through the operation whilst alone as well. So for everything that I've said about it's okay to be alone, and I'm quite happy being alone, at the same time, having someone go through that with you was pretty essential, particularly because I couldn't drive 6 weeks. I needed a chauffeur.
And isn't that that's just so enlightening that somebody will accept us for who we are, whatever. Yeah. And I think too many people put a judgment, or they put the kind of conditions on a relationship. I will love you if, but only if, or Oh, yeah, and to have that, there's a real sense of freedom. I love you, whatever, unconditional love. And I guess the only times I experience that is with a pet, an animal, because it's unconditional, or children, because they will accept us.
Yeah.
And to find adults or relationships when it's unconditional, that's a very rare, whether it's heterosexual or in any transgender, whatever.
My primary relationship was with my 8 cats. Esther's my secondary partner. But actually, she says that if I didn't, and the cats are half hers, but they all live at mine. But
there's something about that, isn't there? They're going to love you whatever. And I think that unconditional love, which I think you've also found with Esther, who I've done a podcast with as well, and she's lovely too. That is special, I think.
But the thing is, our bodies can change, not just because of trans, which is quite unique to some extent, but our bodies can change, as I said, because of an accident, but they also change simply because of age.
Yeah.
They change because of health conditions. You can put on weight, you can lose weight. If you say, I'm only in love with you because you're thin and young, both those things have got a pretty odds-on chance of changing. Age is definitely going to happen to you, and weight gain is almost likely to happen.
Body
those
change.
2 things are going to change. And if your love is conditional upon someone staying, like the front cover of a magazine, or then
it's
you're
pretty
not
shallow.
loving the right part of that person.
No, and it's pretty shallow if it's based on that, isn't it? Yeah. So you mentioned the fact that your sex drive diminished. I wonder what that felt for you. What did that feel like for you, that your libido diminished?
Well, I don't think I had a huge one to start with, which probably helped. Libido, that is. I had a puberty disorder when I was growing up as a teenager. That meant my puberty hit 3 years or more after every other guy of my age. So I was the shortest kid in class. They were nearly going to give me human growth hormone to make me grow. So I had a hormone delay. It's called delayed puberty onset or something. There's 2 cuts. They have precocious puberty and delayed puberty, because basically if you don't hit puberty within a 2-year window or so, you're considered to have it either too early or too late. So mine was coming too late. So I was under a pediatrician for 7 years with that. And I never had a sex drive, really. So I never discovered my own body till I was, late 15, 16-year-old. But everyone by then at school was ahead of me on the hormone. And but when I eventually, did have sexual relationships, I actually found sex painful. And this is something people very rarely ever talk about. Some women talk about it, but even fewer men talk about it. But I found sex super sensitive, super painful, and I actually hated it. I loved foreplay. I loved, intimacy. I loved being romantic. And I would do as many of those things as possible to avoid the actual intercourse part of it, because the intercourse was always going to be the bit that began to hurt, and also was literally an anticlimax for me.
That's yeah. And and I don't think full penetrative sex doesn't have to be. I mean, there's so much more about intimacy than that. And even I saw an amazing program several years ago now, and it was about and it featured a guy who'd had a car accident. He'd been an absolute stud beforehand, but then he lost all sensation from the waist down, and he said, that's it, I can't have sex anymore, and it completely wasted, and I feel wretched. And they showed him with not graphically, but he was with a sex therapist who was a physical sex therapist rather than a talking one.
Yeah.
And he said afterwards, a session with her, he said that was the best sex I'd ever had. And it just goes to show you that it really doesn't have to be just that wham bang, thank you ma'am, or whatever, that kind of full penetrative sex, which so many people put a store on, that they forget about the intimacy and about how you can be close to somebody, or those erogenous zones that are not talked about.
Exactly. I mean, the 2 biggest sex organs we have are our brain and our skin.
Yes.
and the skin covers us head to toe and is all connected
Yes.
and goes back to your brain. So, just when you tickle someone, people, we used to joke when we were evangelical Christians that tickling was like Christian foreplay, because it was the only, it was the only way to kind of touch someone whilst it being supposedly innocent, but you all knew that you were actually, oh, this is rather nice, so you can touch someone anywhere and it trigger those feelings. You can also put someone bar of chocolate and a tub of ice cream, and it can trigger oxytocin release in you, and that can trigger the same feelings as well.
Yeah.
So sex doesn't have to mean just penetration at all. And I not that I've learned to have intimacy outside it. I actually went through a phase of, because I'd done kind of Christian evangelical marriage, complete faithfulness for 15 years. It's not that I wanted to go off and be unfaithful, but what I wanted to do was to go and explore, partly to see, again, because I was this reluctant transsexual, I wanted to try and see if it was a gender thing or a sexuality thing. So I tried a lot of sex, and I also wanted to see if this painful thing was down to me or down to the people I've been with. Yeah. So I tried a lot of sex, a lot of forms of sex. I dated a lot of therapists, including several sex therapists. So I've got 3 versions of that. But I realised in all of that it wasn't about them, and it was about me. But also that I learned through all of it, including going on sex, body and communication workshops in the US and in the UK, that there was way more to sex than people traditionally put out there. And I ended up in the most, I absolutely am still a sensual person and a tactile person. But for me, and for now at least, penetration has been off the cards for 3 or 4 years. It was off the cards for the last couple of years of my male body. And it's been off the cards for the last couple of years with my female genitalia body. Because it's not something that drives me. It's not something that I yearn for. But it doesn't mean I can't have pleasure. I have a fully functioning, rather wonderful clitoris now. And there are things that just tick my boxes more than sex sometimes. And going out for dinner and just spending the time being absolutely in enjoyment of the presence of your partner, the conversations you're having, and the amazing orgasmic food, of course, and not thinking this is just a prelude to getting that person into bed later. I mean, who really wants to go to bed with a full stomach anyway?
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? I mean, it can be liberating to have date nights and to flirt with people without the end goal being sex.
And it's more about, that's more about enjoying the moment rather than you say, what's going to be at the end of it. And I think there's so much emphasis on that people say, date night, so it's got to end in sex. Yeah. But just enjoying the moment and being with somebody, I think that is far more enjoyable and fulfilling than what's, it's like jam tomorrow, isn't it? Kind of, what's at the end of it, or what's the goal, or the carrot at the end of it. It's just, and then if it doesn't end up that way, because as you say, someone's got a full stomach, or they've had too much to drink, or they're just too tired, well, what a letdown. And then that takes away from the enjoyment of being in the moment.
No, and I think it's been liberating for me to realise that you can have good, successful, fulfilling relationships when sex isn't a primary or even any component of it, or certainly sex is conventionally defined. And I'm in the best relationship I've ever been in right now.
Oh, that's so nice.
Sex, as traditionally defined, doesn't feature per se.
No.
And it's incredible. And I've made, additional decisions around that not to keep the relationship going, far from it, but in order to give each other freedoms that wouldn't prevent us from exploring sex with each other or with another, or with people outside of our direct relationship, should that arise, should it come onto the horizon.
Yeah. And that's part of you being able to have that honest and open relationship, in as much as being honest with each other, and not and being open in your feelings and thoughts, and being able to explore those as to what's okay and what isn't, which so many couples never have, which is so
sad. Relationships have to have agreements of sorts.
Yeah.
so that you both know where you stand. But
Mm.
we've kind of given each other agreements that are pretty open-ended, to say the least. And yet the result of those open-ended agreements is that neither of us has done anything outside of our relationship. And yet people who create agreements that lock each other in have a very high chance of wandering.
Isn't
So
that
there's an irony there. You
interesting?
give each other
There is.
that you
That's
tend not
very
to.
ironic.
You give each other a rule that says you can't, and then that little rebellious, oh, would it be more the dark side? It's alluring.
Yeah. Yes. Very true. Very true. It is. It's about, what is it? Constraints, isn't it? Or you can't do that, so I want to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm one of those people, if I see a sign that keep off the grass, I'll walk on it. And if there's no sign there, I'll respect it. I have that bipolar naughtiness. I can't help it.
Yeah, and talking about your bipolar ups and you have bipolar ups and downs, and you've told me about your mental health issues and struggles at times, and I'm curious as to about how that affects your relationship.
Well, again, being in a relationship has absolutely helped, but at the same time, I haven't lent upon my partner to solve anything. And I've got to the point where I no longer regard solving my mental health as an issue. I now manage it and embrace it. I've befriended my mental health conditions. I have a few. I have anxiety disorder, I have bipolar, I've had multiple suicide attempts, I have some OCDs, and I'm affected severely by the change of weather at the end of the year when the light goes. So I have SADS. So those things all combine to make my whole life an emotional, seasonal, rocky road journey at times. And yet I'm never looking to my partner to be the solution for any of those things. And she has been with bipolar partners before as well, and says I'm completely different to them. Not because that makes me better, but just different. Everybody is different. So being with a partner who has a mental health condition doesn't mean you understand the next partner who's with someone with a mental health condition. But I guess I look to myself to be responsible for my moods, my reactions, and how I could keep surviving. I don't make that contingent upon them. But Esther has obviously got to know me, and she has been brilliant at recognizing that, for example, when I have a low mood, she knows you need to go out because other people lift me, or equally she says you need to go and look after someone, because if I go out and look after someone and do some support, mental health support, LGBT support for someone, with some other kind of crisis counselling and care for another person, it lifts me out of my own funk if I start saving someone else. But equally, if I'm high as a kite, at some event or at a party, she knows also that sometimes I might need a little bit of steering towards the exit door before I get out of hand. I mean, I know myself now because of my own self-management. When I'm getting to a high level, that I need to extricate myself from a situation to avoid becoming. I get drunk without alcohol in that sense. I get high without drugs. That's how it feels like when I'm bipolar high. At that level, I am my own amusement. And equally at that level, though, I lose inhibitions. And despite having no sex drive, I think one of the things that is often true of people who are hypomanic is you can become hypersexualized. So although I don't have a sex drive at those high levels of bipolar, what I do have is a very, very high flirtation level. And so I will flirt with a lot of people, sometimes indiscriminately, as Esther once commented once. We were at a pub and I was getting high as a kite and I started kind of kissing random strangers, some of whom were named me and some of whom weren't. It was consensual kissing in the sense that I was flirting and then it ended up in a kiss. But with one of them, she literally said, "Oh my God, I was totally okay with the first three people you kissed, but that fourth person, really?" And I thought, that's the kind of girlfriend I like. Instead of like giving me a hard time and knowing that I was out of kind of conscious control of what I was doing, she recognized that it was my bipolar condition that was losing my inhibitions, and she just took the piss out of me for it instead, which totally changes the response to a situation like that. And she also, I suppose, she has said in the past that because of my asexuality, knowing that I wasn't going to ever go further than a kiss with someone it kind of made it easier to accept that I would be flirtatious outside of our relationship. But we've both had bisexual periods of our lives, or bisexuality isn't really a period per se, but we're both attracted to both genders, and other genders outside of two, to be honest. I find non-binary and trans people particularly interesting as well. But the angle that we've kind of got is that when we go out together, we both flirt with everyone in that sense. And sometimes, and we know each other's type, and yet we haven't necessarily ended up with each other's type. We've ended up with each other because we love each other and because we're attracted to each other emotionally. Physical's definitely there as well. But the attraction is towards each other. But we recognize that we're one to simply look at the external, that we have a type that we like. And so when we're out, we'll say, oh, she's your type, or he's your type. You know, and so we'll often point to them and draw attention to them for each other. So we're actually picking out people to flirt with almost, which is kind of ironic again. It's the exact opposite of what you would expect in a relationship, where a cautious couple might steer their partner away from anyone that would be a distraction or a temptation, and we kind of encourage each other. So I remember going to an event, and there was a gorgeous mixed race youth worker with a great gender presentation and a great look and an accent. And I love accents. I fall in love with accents quite a lot. and I went up to talk to them, and I went to talk to them about youth work, and then came back and talked to Esther again. And she goes, "Were you flirting with her?" And I said, "No, just talking about youth work." She said, "Why not? Why weren't you flirting with her?" She said, "She's so your type. And in fact, she's my type too. I would have flirted with her." And I thought, that is just so, it just takes away that stigma of talking about attraction, because we fall in love with people. We fall in love with the unique flirty personality that's in front of us, because you can't really end up together with someone unless one of you flirts with the other one. So by definition, relationships start when at least one of you flirts and one of you responds. So you're falling in love with a flirty person. And then when you get together, you then expect them to turn off ever being flirty to anyone again. And yet that's part of the very thing that you fell in love with. So if there's a freedom to maintain that, it's quite radical, because you're actually telling the person, keep being yourself, because the person I fell in love with is you. So I don't want you to change. I want you to keep being you. I'd rather you kept being you with me, but at the same time, I want your whole personality to keep shining, and not now put some of it in a locker, because now you're committed to me. So we have that freedom in that sense to keep being ourselves, which was rather incredible, and I love it.
And that is very rare, because most couples that I talk to, like, well, people, they just get, it's their fear, isn't it, that insecurity, they're going to go off with somebody else, and it's all about that. Whereas you obviously both feel very comfortable in your own bodies and your own beings, that you can allow that to happen and not feel threatened. And that takes a lot of understanding of ourselves, and a lot of feeling secure in a relationship.
Yeah, I mean, you have to feel secure in yourself in addition to feeling secure in a relationship. And I think if you haven't got the first one, then you're never going to feel secure in a relationship anyway. And do you really want to be with someone who is only staying with you because they have to? I mean, I say to Esther, a couple of times a year, I want to be with you for as long as that's the thing that mutually we both want. So literally on a day-by-day basis, I want to be in love with you and in relationship with you. And if that changes, if there's something that's short-term that is fixable because one of us is in a funk, then let's fix it. But if it's a long-term drifting apart, then let's move on. Because I don't want to be hooked to someone who doesn't want to be with me. I said, I want to wake up, with the person who still wants to be with me, not who's already thinking elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I'd like that to go on forever. And in some respects, but I'm not also going to write a piece of paper down saying you must be with me forever, because that would change it.
Yeah, and I think that's what happens with so many people. That is just the opposite of what so many people feel. And the couples I work with generally are very much that way. They're fearful that, well, you've got to be with me, whatever. And as soon as you stop loving me, or you've had an affair, or and I'm not saying that's right, but they based so much on that rather than, well, what wasn't working in our relationship? All right, it wasn't an agreement that you could go after someone else, but what wasn't working in the relationship, that what needs weren't met for you, that you needed that somewhere else. It's all about, well, you're rejecting me. And I think that's what it comes back to, that insecurity of ourselves that starts it. And if you don't feel that secure in yourself, then that's when it will go awry, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's back to, you know, being responsible for your own happiness and not, you know, expecting your partner to deliver it to you on a plate. And again, if it's, you know, if it's delivered and forced, it's not going to be true anyway.
Yeah. And how many people are completely isolated and alone in a relationship?
Yeah.
Scary stuff.
Yeah, and we have the kind of the additional irony in the fact that we've been together 5.5 years coming up for, and we spent first kind of year and a half dating, having quite an unconventional relationship already, and then Esther moved in for 2 years, and then she moved out for 2 years. And my mother only this last year sent us both Christmas cards saying, "You're so lucky to have each other as friends." And we said, "Pardon, friends?" So I rang my mother up and said, "How come you called us friends of each other?" And she said, "Well, you're friends, aren't you?" And I said, "No, we're partners still." She said, "What? I thought you broke up 2 years ago." And everyone assumed that because Esther moved out, that we were no longer a couple, and that when we were seen out together, we were just really good exes. And the number of people who assumed that living together was the, you know, the end goal, the pinnacle of a relationship, and that moving out by definition was the end of a relationship. It was recognizing that we both had different styles of living. Esther's a minimalist, I'm a maximalist. You know, I don't love my cats pooping everywhere, but I love having cats running around, and Esther has lots of nice furniture and wouldn't like them being demolished. So we have different attitudes to our life, to our spaces, and different kind of times of getting up and things. And I like, because I don't sleep much, I'm an insomniac, I like to lie awake, listen to the radio all night. And if I can do that on my own freely, that's great. If Esther's staying over, then I have to put headphones in, and that's annoying. You know, I like to, you know, starfish in the bed and take over the entire double bed. And we both like our own different spaces that we wake up in. Yet when we go away, you know, several times a year on conferences or talks or do various other things around the country, we'll stay in a hotel room together and share a bed. And that then the hotel's then extra special because it's that time when we're always staying over, you know, and we stayed over at each other's occasionally, and we'll do so again, but we don't live together. I'm like, oh my God, that's got to be really weird. I said, no, it's the opposite. It's brilliant. Because it means every night we say goodnight to each other. We Facebook message each other like we're still dating. You know, there's a childish teenageness about the social chat that goes on. Every day we wake and tell each other what our day has been, because we don't live in each other's pockets all day. Because we also both work from home, it also made it additionally harder, because when we were living together, we saw each other 24/7, never left each other's side.
Oh yeah, that would be.
Now we have that variety.
Yeah. So do you, if you don't sleep over and you don't effectively live together, do you see each other regularly? Do you spend time with each other physically?
We spend every weekend together. From the afternoons through to late night, we spend those weekends together, and then once or twice during the week we'll meet up and go out for dinner and things like that. We share a car, but we have two houses. Although I do think Esther's got the better deal, because she's got a flat in the city, and she also tells people she has a house in the country, which is right. And then people ask me, so what have you got, Katie? And I say, I've got a house in the country. And they get, and you got half shares in Esther's flat in the city? No. Esther's one of these cheeky people who absolutely rocks that kind of heads I win, tails you lose. What's mine is mine, and what's yours is mine. I want it, but if I don't want it, it's definitely yours. So I love her cheek. And when you ask Esther, would you like for dinner, like, would you like A or B? She's both. And you know, so I've always respected her honesty around just saying what she wants. And again, that's another part of beautiful communication. But also, she goes back home Sunday night, and I always pack her off with a couple of cooked dinners for the week, because I do all the cooking. And so at the weekends I cook for her here. During the week, I send her home with a couple of cooked meals. And when they run out, she goes out and gets herself a takeaway, or occasionally cooks us something very, very simply. And then when I go into town during the week, it's usually she that takes me out for dinner. So there's a lot of role reversals in the relationship that don't have to be gendered.
Well, is it? Because what is it, role reversal? I mean, isn't it just what you agree your relationship will look like? I mean, it's your agreement between you.
And you play to your strengths.
Yes, but isn't that what we should all do? Because I'm going to come back to something in a minute. It's in my head. Please let me go back to it. But I want to just say, couples so often in relationships, they concentrate on the negatives. You don't do this, you're not this, instead of playing to each other's strengths. And that is so destructive. Instead of saying, but I love this about you, you're supportive, you're good at this, they just go, well, you don't do that. And then all they're focusing on is that, and if you focus on the negative, you'll get more negative.
That's exactly it, and that's exactly what we do. We love the positives out of each other, and the positives that benefit us we definitely take advantage of. But where there are negatives, we recognise, well, actually, you know, if there's anyone who's got to change in this, it's my attitude to those negatives.
Yeah.
So those negatives have always been in that person, and I still fall in love with them, and it's their problem to fix it. The only person who's going to fix those things, if they need fixing them, are in their own time and in their own way. Again, if you fix something for someone else rather than for you, that
can't fix. No.
As far as I'm concerned, and it's a plaster, not a cure. Any change you've got to be for yourself, and any change you've got to be of yourself, and that works both ways.
Yeah, we can't fix someone else. We can only fix ourselves. Totally, I really go with that.
Mm.
And the thing I want to go back to was when you talked about Esther, where she likes the best of both worlds. Is that what she's getting with you?
She has used that exact phrase of me, and when she first met me, she couldn't even work out what gender I was visually. First thing she saw was long hair and breasts, and then she heard the voice, and she said, "Oh my God, that's no." And then a phrase that she's often used is, "That's no ordinary." But she's predominantly attracted to men, but absolutely recognises the beauty of body and soul of women. She's been with women as well, so she has called herself bisexual in there. But she's also said that she now calls herself pansexual, which is been with men, women, and people. So there's more than two genders represented in those three species. So yeah, she's absolutely said she gets the best of both worlds with.
Right.
And I'm a gender mix in that sense. So
so she wants it all, and she's got it all in you. And that was kind of like, yeah.
Maybe that's what makes me feel super secure, saying, Esther, if you're missing out on the sex life, you can go and find it elsewhere, because I know that nobody else is going to deliver what I do. I feel quite secure in that, because my cooking is pretty good. But no one person will fulfill everything. But we've discovered that works for us is to say, well, if you have other needs that aren't being met in a relationship, I have no issue with you finding them fulfilled elsewhere. Be that the sexual component, be it another close friend you want to hang out with who's got different interests. Because again, you don't want to drag your partner to things that they're not interested in. Yes, there's sometimes you go and support someone. You know, they may be doing a talk somewhere or performing something, and that feels good to have your partner supporting you there. But if you drag them to absolutely everything that is your thing and not their thing, you're going to drive each other bored and nuts with that. And there's this other thing I find about relationships, that relationships have this all or nothing thing. So you've got lots of close friends, then you fall in love with someone and end up dating them, marrying them, whatever. And there's assumption then that all of your other relationships, the degrees of closeness, intimacy, and time all have to dial down. And so if relationships are like a 10 out of 10 for intimacy and time, and your closest friends are 7 or 8s, and your less close friends are 6s and 7s and 4s and 5s, this thing about being in this single committed one relationship is that all your 6s, 7s and 8s are all going to knock back down to 4, 5 and 6s. And so many people say when they get together, if they're friends, they say, but once you ended up with them, you stop seeing us. Now, what we have is, it means we also continue to have really close friends of all genders without jealousies. And we encourage each other to still spend time with our friends completely, you know, and there's things that we do with them. And, you know, I'll have sleepovers with friends and people who've always felt free to come and, you know, share my bed and lie in bed and watch a movie with me without it being a sexual jealousy of any kind. So, yeah, we recognise that different people will fulfil the gaps in our relationships, other than not filling our own ones. Yeah.
And I wonder how, I mean, you seem to manage your relationship very well, but I think one of the things that crops up that with couples that I see is that their lives are so full of other stuff, they haven't got time for themselves, let alone for each other. And I think you seem to manage that better than most of couples I see, because they say, well, I'm so busy, I've got to work, I'm working 24/7, and I've got to ferry the kids here, there and everywhere, and I just don't have time. But
some of that's about life balance choices.
Yeah.
I mean, and okay, if you've got kids, some of those choices go out the window straight away. And Esther's not wanted kids. I could never have kids, even before I was infertile. And there's an advantage there without the kids. I have cats, they're very demanding. But we both, being self-employed, even with being self-employed, we're not kind of like, even as self-employed, I worked 16 hours a day in the past. Now I work 3 or 4. You make a choice, and rather than, I'd love to be rich and wealthy, but I'm not. Rather than being rich and wealthy, I'd rather be sane. And so we both spend our mornings in our own homes, completely looking after ourselves. Neither of us taking on kind of client work until the afternoons. I don't take on speaking commitments until the afternoons or meetings. So we both have that entire morning to look after ourselves, to love ourselves up, to, you know, read the paper slowly, to meditate, to whatever it is that, you know, grounds you every day.
Yeah.
And then we start our days in the afternoon and then decide which of our evenings we spend with each other or with others. So there's a great freedom to that. But I guess self-employment is both a blessing and a curse in that sense, and you've got to manage that just as much as a relationship. And we've both got to reasonable balances in that sense.
Yeah. And it is about choices quite often, but people feel they don't have a choice. They've got to keep that their lifestyle or whatever it is, or whatever drives them in their career, or
well, mostly we do always have choices, but we don't always like the consequences of those choices, or the risks or the fear attached to it, or the insecurities attached to it.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that's where the relationship gets neglected, and so do they as people. And so that is consequences of it. So it's their call, really, isn't it? And they say, I don't have a choice. Well, you do, but you don't want to accept the consequences of those actions, and maybe they're very unpalatable, but that's your choice. Exactly it. What is the most critical component even in your view to maintaining a good relationship? I think you've covered some of that, but what's the most critical?
I think they go together because they need to define each other, but honest communication is as simple as that.
Yeah.
Because you can have dishonest communication and you can have honesty but no effing communication.
Yeah.
But because particularly someone can be honest in an angry way and just launch tirades at the person. I'm just being honest. No, you're not. You're being angry.
Yeah.
But honest, respectful communication qualified in that trio, really. And communicating your needs, communicating your desires, communicating everything, but without projecting then this kind of demand on the other person of the kind of response you're going to get. I mean, one of the things when I did these sex and body workshops that I learned on them was ask. They had this kind of phrase, this kind of mantra, which is absolutely brilliant. Always ask for 100% of what you want. Be willing to hear no, and then negotiate for a win-win. And I've kind of brought that, and that was about sex and bodies and consents and what you like in a sex and a relationship life. But I think it applies to pretty much everything in life.
Doesn't it
Ask,
just?
don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask for what you want, but don't expect you're necessarily going to get it. And then,
And how many
take the
people will
balance.
actually ask? And there are times that say, well, they should know what I want. Well, sorry, you haven't got a mind reader there. You're not a mind reader. How do you expect anybody to read your mind? And it can change.
Isn't
And the
that thing
classic,
so common though? The mind reader phrase so common is chucked at each other in relationships. Well, how did you expect me to ever know that I'm not a mind reader? And it's so common.
the classic guy says, you know, you've had an argument. I've done it myself from when I was younger. And you've had an argument and your partner comes up to you, your husband will come up, put his arm around, get off. And they're like, okay, she doesn't want to be touched when she's kind of getting over this. So the next time there's a flare up, he keeps his distance. And then I'm going, well, why the hell can't he give me a hug? He doesn't care about me. Like,
yeah, because you interpret from the previous situation without ever having the communication about it, that from then on, that's what you should know. I learned that in relation with my ex-wife, that if she slams the door, it means stay out. I did that for quite some time. And then she kept slamming the door. And then I said, and then she said, why aren't you coming in? I said, because you told me to stay out last time. She said, no. Slamming the door is me calling attention to the fact that I want you to come in and diffuse things. I'm like, ah. So
how do you know unless you ask? Well, ask for a hug. Oh,
yeah.
but it feels so difficult. Well, if you don't ask for what you need, you're not going to get it.
Yeah, so
well,
don't
it feels
blame
so
the other
difficult.
person for not delivering what you won't communicate.
Yeah.
And there are multiple ways of communicating. It doesn't always have to be verbal. You can learn to read signs from people. But it makes such a difference to have healthy and good communication. But there's also, I think within that, sometimes it can drift and it can be useful to have what I would call check-ins. So I have a kind of a check-in with Esther every couple of months, usually on a long car journey. It's great because they're trapped in the car, they can't get out at high speed. Stick Guardians of the Galaxy sort of soundtrack on in the background, which cheers us both up with great driving music. And then we'll have a long talk for an hour and a half usually about our relationship, about our desires, about our wants, about our dreams, about fulfillments, etc. And we do that regularly. And there's two things I usually ask. One is, you know, how are you where it stands with our, you know, lack of traditional sex life right now? And I just reiterate the freedoms. I don't like the phrase of giving someone permission. We don't give each other permission. We acknowledge each other's freedoms because nobody owns anyone, even if a piece of paper says you own them. It's rubbish.
No.
You know, the language of the marriage and all the rest of it is so rooted in ownership still. And so we don't give permission. We acknowledge each other's freedoms and we just reiterate that we have freedoms because we are individual human beings. But the second thing that I try and do from time to time is say, okay, so what are your top 5 dreams? What are the top 5 things that you want right now? What are the top 5 things that you love about me? You know, and then we switch. And so we regularly have that opportunity to say what's not working, or but not necessarily blame the other person for it, but say, you know, what are you going to do about that? And equally, what's the top 5 things that you love about our relationship right now? And if you do that regularly, it's not forced, and there's no like every 3 months, but it's just casually bringing that into a relationship every couple of times a year. You recognize what you value about each other, and also what areas in which you want to work on. But those areas might not be relationship areas, but really very much about what the individual needs to do with their own issues.
Yeah, and to I encourage people to do that, because it is, instead of having the conversation about the mundane of how's your day been, kind of, or that real, that mundane rubbish that we deal with. Isn't it so much nicer? You do that when you first meet someone, but then it often gets lost because our dreams and aspirations, or our goals, or what our feelings are, what all of that, they're still there and they can change. But isn't it so lovely to be able to talk about that?
And living apart actually helps that in some respects, because I mean, there's something like 2 million couples who have chosen to live apart in the UK. I think it is.
Right.
Last stat I heard. But I mean, you know, when Esther goes back home on a Sunday night, she knows she's got to put the bins out for Monday morning. But there's no kind of, you know, ranting at each other in a relationship for whose turn it is to put bins out. You know, and why didn't you do that? Because we each are responsible for our own domain in that.
Yes.
Way. So I suppose if you're living together, then one way to get around that is to certainly make sure that you each have a space, a privacy space within a house. You know, the study,
Oh, yeah.
the meditation room, whatever it might be, the shed at the bottom of the garden, and sheds for girls as well. Equal rights on sheds. But, you know, having that, I mean, we've gone the whole hog. You know, we have 100% of our own domain in that sense.
Yeah.
You know, and a single drawer in each other's house still. But ultimately, we are responsible for, you know, our own space. So those, as you say, the mundane never really comes into the relationship now, which is
no. And I think that can kill a relationship dead, because that you just get caught up in that. And I've been guilty of that in the past too. You just, I think it really does kill a relationship, because you just forget what brought you together in the first place, and the excitement and the joy of life. I think I said to you earlier before we started recording, I was in company of a group of people. I was on a group walk, which is quite nice to chat to people while you're walking. But there were so many negative people there, and they were stuck in the mundane of life, and that, I'm screaming in my head, get me out of here, because I want to look around and enjoy the countryside. And the sun was shining. It was a glorious day. But all I heard were these people that were just plodding along and just being caught up in that mundane of life. Well, I really, you know, the dog won't stop barking, and I'm really fed up. The road hasn't been repaired. Like,
no, we have so much choice that we don't take responsibility for actually having. The choice on what we want to focus on.
Yeah.
You know, where we obsess, where we choose to look, what we choose to comment on. You know, and we could choose to focus on, you know, the nitty-gritty things that really annoy us about a partner, or you could lift your eyes up and focus on bigger stuff.
I know.
So where we put our attention often then does affect, you know, our mood fun. So
of course it does.
Something better and bigger and brighter and more fun.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I absolutely love the fact that, you know, the things that Esther and I choose to do together are, you know, all stimulating, encouraging company things, beautiful things. We get, you know, lots of art galleries and things together. But we also absolutely choose to do our own thing if we, you know, we know it's the thing that's going to drive us more than the other partner, so we don't have that expectation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, none of those put the bins out questions are just boring.
Yeah, and that is so nice, because, well, we only have one life as far as we're concerned. As far as we know, there might be people who have beliefs about others, but there's nothing to prove it necessarily. So living in the moment is just so important, so special. And
I feel like I've lived 5 or 6 lives within my lifetime already, so I'm not worried about another life.
I've really enjoyed talking to you today, Katy. It's been absolutely, it's just been fun, and I feel we uplifted. I think it's just been just so joyful, our conversation. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to specifically kind of say before we come to an end. Maybe there's something else you want to bring to listeners' attention. Like, go ahead.
Nothing other than, as I say, I always come back to, you know, appreciate yourself and appreciate your partner, but again, fulfill your needs in yourself, and your partner is then absolutely, I love cake, chocolate cake particularly, and I love chocolate cake with nice buttery creamy filling, absolutely. But I can eat a cake with or without the icing. And that may sound kind of dismissive for my partner, but she's absolutely the icing on my cake. And the days in which she's there in my life, then, I'm loving cake with icing today. And the days in which she's not, because, you know, it's a couple of days before we see each other, we still message each other online, we still call each other. But they're days without the icing in easy reach. But I still love the cake with the filling without, and I'm responsible for that filling. So, you know, cake is natural for everything, and that's my process of relationships. You know, make your own cake.
I've looked on your website, and it's fascinating. There's so much on there. I think for anybody to read and explore, and I haven't explored 1 million millisecond.
It's quite a full hyperactive website.
Isn't it? There's so much there.
I'm interested in everything.
You are, and I think that's. I'm sure it will appeal to lots of people in different ways. So, can you? I mean, all your details will be in the show notes. But for those listening, where do they get in touch with you?
Best place to find online is katyjon.com, and that's Katyjon. And they're my two birth names, coincidentally. Catherine Elizabeth, I was born as for a couple of hours. There's another whole other story, another podcast. And then Jonathan Mark was my male name, so I kept a bit of each. But katyjon.com. And on the first page of it, there's a complete list of links to all my social media accounts and my several other websites for people's different interests. And genderagenda.net is where I do a lot of support for LGBT people. So yeah.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed today. Thank you so much, and I've loved connecting with you. Thank you so much, Katy.
Pleasure.
And bye for now.
Bye-bye.
So you can find all the information about this show in the show notes. And you can find lots more on my website, www.yourrelationshipspecialist.co.uk, including the link to my podcasts. And you can also sign up on my newsletter, which has lots more tips and offers. So until next time, bye for now.